Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome back. Today I have Megan Mitchell. Megan, how are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm fantastic because I'm super excited, which maybe sounds a little dorky to say out loud, but I'm really excited to talk about all these legal issues and college students and what parents can do and some of your insights from working in this field for so long. Before we jump into some of that stuff, can you tell me about your background? Tell me about what you do, where you went to school, and why you do what you do. I think that could be really helpful to start with.
Yeah, so I went to UNC Chapel Hill for undergrad, and then I got my law degree from Emory. I right now work as an attorney in Georgia, but I work as an advisor nationwide for families, parents, and faculty dealing with discipline matters at college and university levels.
And how long have you been doing this for?
So I've been in the field of education for about a decade now. I spent a bulk of my career working for the U.S. Department of Education and the Office for Civil Rights, and
Mm.
went independent a couple years ago. Just really saw that there was a need for families having support going through this process from someone who understands both the educational element, but also having a defense mindset. And so I've been doing this individually for about 3 years now.
So when I think about the Department of Education, I think about K through 12. I think about kind of curriculum and maybe even allocation of funding and stuff. What does the Department of Education have to do with college students?
So any recipient of federal funds. So this involves a lot of colleges because any student who's receiving any kind of federal loan money means that the university is getting federal funds. Federal funds are also supporting a lot of research at university and college level. And so when a university or college or any school agrees to take federal funds, they agree not to discriminate. They agree to do certain things. And so the Department of Education comes in. That's what my office did was, hey, if there's a concern that there's a type of discrimination going on, hey, you said that you wouldn't discriminate when you took federal funds. We're going to come in and say, hey, you need to fix that.
Gotcha. So it's tied to the money either through the student or through the university triggers that oversight from the Department of Ed.
Exactly. As soon as they take a dollar, and there's some universities that say, hey, we're going to do all private loans
Mm.
ourselves and we're going to be separate of that. But there's a couple of them nationwide. There's
Can,
a handful.
can you give me some like do you know some of those like off the top of your head?
The biggest ones being religious institutes,
Okay.
where they want the ability to go fully kind of within what they want to value. And so they go, hey, we may want to treat female students different than male students. And so because of that, we're going to go, hey, we're not going to take federal dollars. We'll do our own loans. We'll do our own research. And then they're independent of those federal regs.
Right. It's a way for them to either intentionally avoid need needing to comply with some of these laws or maybe well, I was going to say unintentionally, but it seems like it would always be intentional because why would you say no to a student that's coming in with um, federal funding behind them in the form of student loans?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an intentional opt out.
right,
So a vast majority of the time you're looking at schools that are going to be subject to that kind of federal regulation.
right. How did you get interested in? I mean, you talked about it just a little bit, but how did you get interested specifically going from Department of Ed and kind of oversight of these universities and colleges to criminal defense, correct, of college students?
Yeah, so I worked as a public defender at the beginning of my career. I absolutely loved it. Then I went to Department of Ed and I wanted something with a little more independence. And I got lunch with a friend who was doing criminal defense and said, hey, we need more folks out here supporting these students. And as I started getting into the field, I realized there's a lot of people who aren't familiar with both worlds. There's a
Mm,
lot of great advisors in the educational realm, but they're not always trained in thinking about the theory of the case, building a defense. What does that look like? What does looking at every step of possibilities look like? And how do you build that case? And then we've got defense attorneys who are fantastic at being in the courtroom, but courtroom mentality often is not going to be helpful or successful in the school environment. We're dealing with deans, we're dealing with faculty members who don't want to have someone yelling objection. This isn't a court environment and it has to be treated a little bit differently. And so for me, I've gotten into it and I found a really natural groove of building these two parts of my career that I've worked on to meet this need of helping students going through disciplinary concerns.
So it sounds like one of the big differences between just kind of run-of-the-mill criminal defense and criminal defense within the college environment is, I don't know, maybe you'll reframe this in better terms, but the 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 politics, the campus politics, and I don't mean that in a negative way or pejorative way, but there's a hierarchy, but there are also many bosses too. There are chairs of departments and deans and provosts and chancellors and all of them could be boss over several people. So that sounds much more complicated.
Yeah, it's not as defined of a process as our criminal system. Criminal system,
Right.
we've all seen Law and Order, you follow a process. The university process, sometimes it can be Title IX, sometimes it can be conduct, sometimes it can be non-Title IX sexual misconduct that's handled by the Title IX office. Sometimes a complaint can be filed, but the university doesn't open it for whatever reason. Sometimes it can be on campus, off campus. There's all these factors that go into even what office is going to look at it. And then when you see which office handles it, they handle it different ways. Sometimes it can be a single decision maker, sometimes you're going to a hearing. And so there's different regulations if you're dealing with Title IX, which is a federal regulation which governs misconduct, discriminate or you're dealing with Title IX, which governs over misconduct for sexual misconduct at the university level, or student code of conduct. If you are accused of cheating, you got into a fist fight, you stole from a professor or your roommate. And then you also have housing. So there's a lot of different things at the university level that can all be working either together or not at all together.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was getting ready for our conversation today was I imagined being a student on campus, and let's say I'm let's say that I'm okay breaking some rules, doing naughty stuff, whatever. I mean, speaking for a friend, of course. Um, and um, one of the challenges or problems that I might have as a student is I don't know the difference between what is s- college pol or university policy, then their campus, there are laws that only govern stuff on campus. And then I walk across the sidewalk and now I'm in a municipality, but then I'm also in a different state than I grew up in. And then there are federal laws too.
Mhm.
And then to add to this, I've had clients who have been brought in front of peer tribunals, which that please tell me if I'm nuts, but like that seems a little strange to me to be judged by a jury of your peers, but like they're 19. Um, and then there are faculty tribunals of some sort where they pass judgment on what, like, did something break a policy or a rule, and then what are the consequences for it? And then there are all these other laws, as you're talking about. Can you can you talk about how those things get separated out and some of the complications that you've seen from that? I mean, because I assume that is a complication on almost every campus. I can't believe that that's just an outlier of an experience.
100%. So I think I like to break it down for my clients in kind of two categories. There's going to be state law, and then there's going to be kind of campus conduct. So we've got our state law. That's either going to be governing by our local municipality, our city police, or our campus police. Campus police help the university, but they are still police officers at the end of the day, and they report to the judge, to the district attorney, if there was a crime, if there's going to be someone pressing charges or any criminal charges coming. That can be either the campus police or the local police. And so there's those laws. Getting in trouble in the kind of state level legal field can impact campus because there's a lot of policy saying, hey, if you get charged with a felony, you're going to be in trouble with us, even if it was somewhere else. Or it can be something that you did can get you in trouble with the state and campus. We see this a lot within Title IX where we're dealing with sexual misconduct. If there's a concern of sexual assault, there may be charges that come on the state level and also the university level. And then we can have things that are not state crimes. They're just a violation of policy. Using AI on a test, stealing something from your roommate. May not want to press charges, but they're still going to say, hey, housing. My roommate stole my socks and I'm really mad about it. And so we can get into these just campus situations. And then within campus, we have different areas where we have, if you're accused of cheating, a lot of the time the professor's going to handle it individually first. Then, if it's just a plain misconduct, just kind of a standard, you violated our policy. Sometimes it's student misconduct. Sometimes it's just a single decision maker. They do an investigation, they provide a report, and a faculty member that's kind of randomly assigned goes, okay, this is what I think should be. Or you go into a full hearing. When it's Title IX, which is dealing with sexual misconduct, which can be sexual assault, sexual harassment, but also stalking and dating violence, relationship issues. Title IX has federal regulations of how it's supposed to go. The federal government came in because many years ago there was a lot of confusion of how these cases were investigated. When I was in school, almost everything was student misconduct or student led hearings. And these were big, heavy topics that were being handled, like you said, by sometimes teenagers. And so it makes a lot more sense that these Title IX issues that are much bigger, heavier issues that have really huge consequences are now being decided and run by faculty and staff of the university. And so there's a lot of different avenues and venues different actions can go down, and different actions done in different places can have different consequences on either side.
Right. Yeah, that's a really great explanation. The campus conduct stuff, I think is also an area of confusion, especially because of um, the focus on AI and cheating recently. And I'm gonna I'm gonna make some kind of assumptions and inferences here, but because the job market has been narrowing over the last 2 years, and business schools are still accepting the same number of students, and let's just stick with business schools as an example. I'm in the shadow of IU right now, um, and so a lot of my clients are at the business school there. There's this increased pressure for perfection because there are fewer and fewer seats available when the music stops
Mm-hmm.
for internships and jobs at Deloitte or Boston Consulting Group or wherever these kids are going. Um, how often are you being brought in for campus conduct stuff versus actually like violation of the law? And and I wonder also like of the conduct violations or the alleged conduct violations, how often is it actually turning into like a criminal violation of some sort, even though originally we thought it was just you know a conduct issue on campus? Because like you said, there are a lot of blurred lines there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more and more AI cheating allegations every day. I mean, I'm getting these calls probably once a week of, hey, there's been some kind of trigger of either programming or the professor just says this doesn't seem right, or hey, we put a buzzword in and the buzzword isn't in the essay, or we tracked your writing and it was just copy and pasted. And so I'm hearing that frequently. And then I'm hearing from those students, yeah, but everybody's doing it. And if I'm not doing it, then I'm going to get the lowest grade in the class because it feels like everyone around me is doing it. And it's tricky and it's complicated and it's having really big consequences because the first allegation often is a zero in that class, which can impact GPA, which can have permanent transcript consequences for these students. And then further violations, if you're caught again or accused again, can have really, really big consequences on conduct. And so that's been definitely increasing. In terms of overall misconduct, it varies school to school, case to case, if the police end up getting involved or not. Sometimes we have cases where it's just the police end up involved and the school goes, eh, that's between you and them. A
Mm.
lot of the times we'll see the police were initially involved, charges may or may not come, and then we're still dealing with major consequences at the university level of, okay, there aren't criminal charges now, but you're still at risk of long-term suspension or expulsion.
Let's pull in the Greek life aspect. You and I talked about this before. Can you speak a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of Greek life and specifically around um, hazing, drugs? I hate to even say it, like arms sales, quite literally. Yeah, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of like what prospective clients or clients are bringing your way that are related to Greek life?
Greek
Because that
life.
actually adds the Pan-Hellenic layer
Mhm.
in addition, which seems to be super judicial or whatever the term is, like outside of the university.
Hmm.
It's outside of the law, and it's another layer of oversight, which again seems very strange to me. But yeah, can
Yeah,
speak to that.
I definitely see consequences coming from Greek life. I think that there are a lot of situations where you can get very much into this group mentality that there are things that are going on inside the house that when they leave the house can have really big consequences. And there's often seeing more drugs, more alcohol, more just pressure to do things that may not be a conduct that do something that has a conduct consequence we're seeing. And I also see where we'll have charges that potentially come from the university level that at the Greek life level have already been investigated. So then
Mm,
for me, I'm dealing with, hey, I've got this case that I've just got, and I really want to make sure that my record's really clean, that the case that we're making is clean. But we've already had a student do a full conduct investigation, conduct interviews. The notes may be messy and iffy, the facts are iffy, but we've had this record created through the Greek life investigation that now I had no control over. And so that gets messy as well. And so definitely seeing, one of the things we think about with college is it's the first time that a lot of these students are having unfettered access to drugs and alcohol and unfettered access to a bedroom. And when those two things get combined, there can be some really problematic consequences. And we see that amplified when we're looking at Greek life, in my experience.
right. How about I mean, this, I'm really deviating now. And how much, how concerned should parents be about a paper trail that's being formed? Because I can imagine, let's go back to me. I'm in a frat, and let's say that I get in trouble or the house gets in trouble, and there's an investigation through Pan-Hellenic Council or whatever. So there's something written up, whatever they write up, and there are some determinations that like Rob was just, boys will be boys. So nothing happens, but it's written down. And what happens later on when maybe I'm applying for a job or maybe I get in trouble somewhere else? Is that record part of, is that protected information under FERPA or I mean not HIPAA? I mean, is that protected information or is that up for grabs or in a gray area?
It's very much in a gray area because it's not FERPA, because it's not the school creating it. And so it's just like your friend's journal. It's subpoenaable. It's not
Hmm.
going to be in a job interview. But where it worries me is we're going to get a little bit of legal nerdy here. A lot of the conduct is done in an evidentiary standard called preponderance of the evidence.
Okay.
In law, this is one of our lower evidentiary standards. It's more likely than not, I've heard somebody say a grain of sand on the scales of justice. So it's 50-50. You need a single grain of sand more likely than not, and there's a violation. This is a lot lower of an evidentiary standard than our typical beyond a reasonable doubt. If you're accused of a crime, to be found guilty of that, there has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. If you have any reasonable doubt that this may not have happened, there should be a not guilty verdict. That's not the case in school conduct issues. A bulk of these are this low evidentiary standard of preponderance. Where that gets me very worried is if we have any evidence that somebody may not be believable, any inconsistencies, then that can be held against you. And so if we're having these paper trails of these investigations at the Greek life level and told a friend and then an investigation, and hey, we're really, really stressed out. And I may have communicated one thing more clearly when I was talking with my friend for the Greek life investigation, but I explained something a lot less clearly when I was interviewed by the dean of students. That's creating an inconsistency. And so for
Right.
me, I'm always trying to keep my paper trail very clear in terms of overall impact for a conduct violation. These can be huge, huge. There are a couple folks out there who literally specialize just in helping students explain to job interviews, explain to future employers, explain to future graduate programs what happened when there was a conduct violation. And so the Greek life investigation may not have a huge impact, but that can impact the overall outcome if there is a student code of conduct violation, and that can have huge impacts long term.
How about social media? I've had clients who have gotten into trouble with posts they made 6 months ago, a year ago, or freshman year, but they're juniors or seniors, and something comes up. And I mean, it is old news, but how does social media and that as evidence play into some of these cases?
It depends. I see social media impacting a lot at the K-12 level because if it
Oh,
touches the school at all, if anybody's talking about, hey, I saw what you posted, you can get in trouble. There's it gets complicated with First Amendment, free speech, and how the school can look at social media posts, but they definitely, definitely get used as evidence in these cases when they're applicable. I also see a lot of internet issues coming up for a lot of colleges and universities have these gossip websites now where if students are having an issue with their friends or there's an accusation that comes up that even before it's the university has any idea that these are coming, the student's name is being drug in these websites. And so even if there is a no violation finding, everybody knows, everybody's talking about it, and it's really hard socially to come back from that. And
it,
it's
it
tricky.
it's like a scarlet letter
Hmm.
with yeah yeah it's the court of public appeal rather than
Hmm.
actually going through like a formal system. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which is kind of terrifying because it's about the it's a it's kids making judgment calls on like their own opinion about a situation that they may not even know that kid,
Yeah.
and they're posting about him or her. Um, yeah, can
A lot of the time I'm seeing those posts coming third or fourth hand, and
right,
it's tough.
right, yeah. I I'm always troubled about, I mean, the gossip websites make me think about how much students rely on Rate My Professor. I mean, it is, and I'm sure you hear about it too, but it is a, it is probably the determinant in terms of like what classes to take.
Hmm.
But they also will post other stuff on there that isn't just about the professor.
Yeah.
And also it's not a university website.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it just seems like there's just so many complicating factors for students. Yeah, and also the climate right now around the First Amendment is very clouded as well because
Yeah.
it seems like some First Amendment speech is protected while others is not. But um, I digress. I want to go back and I'm going to be good. I'm not going to ask any more questions yet that aren't on our formal list. Can you talk about your practice?
Hmm.
And because it looks like you operate in many states,
Hmm.
and so you're based in Georgia, right?
Correct.
Okay. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your practice and why or how you work in other states, how parents find you, presumably parents are the ones looking for you. Um, and then what differentiates you from some of the other law firms? Because I mean, there are tons of attorneys out there. There's a dude whose picture is on the buses around here with the broken arm, and he's like, "Call me, I'll help." So, why not just call that guy?
A lot of reasons. So, first and foremost, I am an attorney in Georgia, but for most conduct issues, you are entitled to an advisor. So, any Title IX issue,
Mm.
you can have an advisor. And a lot of school conduct issues, they also have a matching policy that says you can have an advisor with you. Schools like it a lot when you have somebody who can help them explain the process. And so, what I do is I come in and I help families through this process. And so the advisor can be anybody. I've had people use their boyfriend, parents, that aunt who does contract law. But for me, I come in and I am very, very familiar with our process. With Title IX, nationwide, there is an outline process federally of what has to be done at each step of the way. Some schools are better at informing students about what those rights are. Some aren't great about filling in every single detail in as much detail as I would like. So, part of my job is explaining the process to students and families, and part of my job is thinking about strategy because there's not always a clear path of, hey, I didn't do it, and here's an explanation of why, or hey, I did it, and everything's going to be okay. There's a lot of gray area. And so figuring out what is the best path forward? Is it we get into finding mental health supports and we take some time, we figure out ourselves, and we come to the school and say, hey, I made a big mistake, and here's how I'm working to get better and try and get a lower punishment? Or is it something that we go in and we go full lawyer mode and we present a 200-page evidentiary packet of all the things that support why it, it isn't what they said it was? And so, what makes my office different is just the fact that I've got the legal training. I've worked in defense before, and so I have that mindset of building the case. But I was also raised by a school psychologist. I have spent my whole life in schools. I have spent my almost my entire legal career in and around schools. And because these investigations are being conducted by faculty and staff, it just takes a different mentality. It takes finesse, it takes politeness, it takes kindness, and an understanding of, hey, this is how we're going to present the information in a way that's going to be most beneficial. I recently had a case where the opposing counsel or the counsel for the school came out and said a lot of the times when we have attorneys come in, they make it worse. They make the decision maker angry, they fight it in a way that isn't helpful, and they make it worse. And they were very nice to say that in this situation, we had come in and we'd made it a lot better by explaining things. But it's knowing how to fight it and knowing how to approach the parties in a way that you're not going to burn any bridges.
How do you think your work has changed over your career? Has the type of student changed? Has the ratio of men to women changed, or the type of issue, or the severity of the issue, or the universities? Have they kind of circled the wagons more or maybe opened things up more?
A little bit of it, everything. So the universities have shifted a lot. Like I said, when I was in school, it was almost all student run. When we had the Title IX regulations initially introduced, the schools had to shift how they investigated Title IX cases, but I think it really shifted how they investigated any large scale conduct issue across the board. And we're now seeing a reduction in those rights as OCR has been significantly reduced. I'm seeing a lot of universities stepping back and going, we're going to do it the easy way, or we don't need to go that fast. And
Can you
so
explain what OCR is?
yeah, so OCR is the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights.
Gotcha.
They enforce when the university doesn't conduct a Title IX investigation appropriately. They also enforce if there's allegations of discrimination. But the big thing for conduct is when a university didn't follow the federal rules for how to conduct a Title IX investigation, OCR would come in and they would get in trouble. They would have to do training, or they may have to reverse the decision and do it again, dependent kind of upon the facts. OCR has been significantly limited. A lot of attorneys have been let go, offices have been closed recently. And in the past few months, I've been seeing a lot of universities slacking on what's required by Title IX. And so that's been a shift. And it's in every 4 years, ebb and flow, to be quite frank, of doing this as long as I have. But recently, that's been a big shift. I also think students are a lot more aware of
Mm.
the conduct process. They're a lot more savvy on what Title IX is, what consent is, and they're really quick to file. I've seen a number of cases recently where I've heard students using "I'll Title IX you" as a verb. And so I'm seeing a lot of cases that are being filed at the Title IX level that I wouldn't have seen filed 5 years ago, and certainly not 20 years ago. And so when I'm getting parents coming in, they're going, this was not something that I saw ever in the vernacular when I was in school, and it's a very different environment. We're also seeing a lot of complications with athletes now, with athletes getting NIL opportunities. They're going from big stars on campus to even bigger stars on campus, and that can mean a lot for what the weight of a relationship is. And so athletes dealing with Title IX has gotten a lot more complicated with NIL as they get bigger and bigger. And where a suspension used to just mean, oh, I'm out for the season, a suspension can now mean big impacts on NIL contracts and eligibility. And so that gets really, really complicated.
That makes me think of let's add another layer to the complications. We were talking about like campus conduct and state law.
Hmm.
There's also the NCAA, which
Hmm.
is a whole other organism, kind of a black box
Yeah.
in many ways. How does the NCAA, from your perspective, how does it influence some of these processes? Because I've had some student athletes at D1, D2, D3 programs, and it it seems so much more complicated. The athletic department seems to kind of circle the wagons around these students, especially if it's a important program.
Yeah.
Let's say IU's football team. A student from there that's accused of something, that's a big deal right now.
Hmm.
And not just because of state law and campus conduct, but the athletic department and the NCAA. They have these people that come in and inform everyone what to do, what to say. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had students at big universities who have had psychologists within the athletic department share notes from meetings with head coaches. And that, I mean, obviously there's probably an ethical violation there as a clinician. Um, but I'm interested in the legal ramifications of all this. And so, I mean, can you speak a little bit about the how the NCAA complicates stuff, and maybe if you've had any experience with student athletes kind of under their kind of cloud.
For me, it makes how we approach a case very different
Mm,
because we're not just, okay, what's going to be the best consequence for you? Okay, cool. Let's say there's bad evidence out there. There was something that was on video. Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and figure out what's the best way to approach this in terms of what's the smallest consequence. Okay, you're suspended for a semester. Let's figure out how we could do this. That's how we'd approach it with a traditional student. With an athlete, there's a whole different consequence for a suspension because that can impact your eligibility. We're also looking at it. One action can have very, very different consequences based on who it reaches. If somebody tells a coach, it's not always certain that that person is going to report versus if they tell the Title IX team, that's going to be handled really differently. So you have these situations where how the information gets out really, really impacts where the investigation goes. Then we're also looking at, okay, is there going to be media involved? Is that going to change it? Is the university going to be more concerned because there's media on this of how they're going to handle it? And they may be more harsh. We're dealing with NCAA regulations for eligibility, NIL, and on top of it all, the student's long-term career. And so it can get really, really complicated really fast. And the traditional ways of reviewing a case aren't going to work. I've had cases where people have called and said, coach got a lawyer. This was our go-to criminal guy. And he didn't know what he was doing. He was a great criminal lawyer for anybody who got in trouble at the state level, and he was coach's favorite, but he didn't seem to know what he was doing in my hearing. And now I've been suspended, and now I'm not eligible, and now I don't know what to do. And it can get the implications are a lot bigger than your average students who's like, oh, darn, I'm suspended for a semester. I'm going to go back, live with my folks, get a job delivering DoorDash, and the next semester life goes back to normal.
right.
It's the stakes are
The, the
higher.
the other thing about the student athlete that strikes me is that if we compare that to, let's say, just a fully formed adult outside of university, and we get into trouble with something, and there's pending criminal matter, lawsuit, whatever. Um, it's disruptive, it's inconvenient, it's expensive for a year or 2 years. A year or 2 years for a student athlete, their shelf life is already maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Um, and that, I mean, burns through so much time, not just eligibility, but also physical ability.
And also dealing with the supports that our athletes get. Our athletes get tutoring, counseling, support services, help with registration, getting to class, and then all of a sudden, okay, cool, you still go here, but you're having to figure out, you've been abandoned. You have to figure it all out on your own. Other things I've had is with student athletes, again, we're just looking at, cool, I can stay eligible to play, but am I going to lose my scholarship? I can't. I can't afford to go to this school without my scholarship. And so we're having to calculate all those factors.
How does let's move away from the field and the athletic department and look more broadly at like mental health and substance use and how do those areas intertwine with some of the accusations and the conduct violations and laws? Because I mean we've been using this term like complicated quite a bit. Yeah, what are you seeing in terms of like mental health, substance use, and how those things um, either act as uh, defense for clients or explanations, or I mean, I could imagine that there are many ways that mental health, substance use, and a few other areas could be looked at or viewed.
Yeah. I think substance use in college can get really tough for kids really fast. And then it can lead to a lot of conduct violations because we're making decisions under the influence or we're dealing with any kind of consent matter and being under the influence. And that can get really tricky. I think there's a lot of conversations about having sex under the influence, but any kind of hookup under the influence can still lead to major violations at the university level. And I don't think students are talking about it. I don't think students are thinking about it. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing mental health can play into everything. First, it can play into, okay, am I making my best decisions? You've talked in your podcast a lot that mental health can be really, really tough, especially starting college. And so we're seeing that go, hey, I got into a spiral and I did not make a good choice at the end of that spiral, and now I'm in big trouble. But we're also seeing, hey, I'm in big trouble, and now that's what's going to cause a spiral. I don't want to tell my folks. I don't want to tell my support system. Or, hey, I'm in trouble and my friends aren't talking to me. I'm in trouble because I got in a fight with my roommate and now I feel really, really isolated. And so we're having this where I'm talking with a lot of my clients of, hey, first and foremost, get mental health support for the stress of just going through this accusation, of the fear of, I have worked so hard to get here. What if? And so I see mental health be kind of the causing factor, but then I also see a lot of mental health struggles for students who've been accused of something and are having to figure out, how do I tell my folks? How do I how do I process this?
I wonder how often you have a client where some of the diagnoses um are let's say personality disorders,
Mhm.
where there's a very strong case to be made that like, oh, they really are not in their right mind. Like they are not competent. It seems like a very tricky needle to thread because, well, if they're competent to be a student, but they're not competent in terms of behavior, like inappropriate behavior, socially or whatever. Yeah, I wonder like how you handle that, a situation like that, because I'm sure that you've had clients whose parents or even the client said like, "Oh, this is because like I have this issue." And it really drives my behavior. And I specifically use personality disorders because that can make people think in terms of black and white. It can make them engage in very extreme responses. It can make them misread social cues. Um, yeah, so I could imagine that like that would come up.
That's something where we see not necessarily like with the courts where you're dealing with, okay, are they competent? But often I'm seeing that as the secondary factor. So often in our decision making process where there's the question of, is there a violation? The secondary part of that is, what is the appropriate disciplinary consequence? And so that's often where I'm bringing that up of, hey, for me as someone who's just dealt with folks with mental health concerns for a lot of my career, a lot of the times I'm going to go, hey, are you seeing somebody? Is there a diagnosis? Are you getting supports? Can I get a letter from whoever's giving you support? Or they're coming in and going, hey, I just got diagnosed with something.
And
And
is that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so for me, it's okay, great. Let's get you supports and show this decision maker how this is not going to be repeated. Show them why this was a one-time action and how we're taking real reasonable steps to work through this. Is it, hey, I my medication was really, really off, and I'm an 18-year-old who has gained 40 pounds, and what worked in August is not working in May because my body's changed a lot? Is it, hey, this has triggered a whole different slew of mental health things that weren't in place when I had the structure at home? And this is how I'm working on it. I'm seeing a therapist weekly. I've changed my medication around. I've switched how I'm living. I'm doing these things. And so that's where we're coming in and going, hey, we don't need suspension or expulsion. Let's do academic probation with a promise that we're going to go to therapy 2 times a week. And that's where I'm bringing that information in. It's not going to help often with a no violation finding, but it's going to help with a less severe punishment.
It's gonna mitigate that and really kind of force it into something less severe. It seems like that's a big difference between the types of advisors that are available.
Yeah.
A well-meaning parent or therapist, um, not knowing that if you provide unsolicited information and support might actually change the outcome pretty significantly.
The number of well-meaning folks who cause dire consequences for students that I see is significant. The number of times of, oh, if I just say this or I just do this, everything will be better, and it makes it a lot worse is really big. And so that's something where I've got some folks here that I work hand in hand with of, hey, this is the supports my client needs, and I'm going to work, we're all going to sign the papers and the releases, but I'm going to work with your mental health provider to get exactly what I need. And often we're doing 3 or 4 drafts of, hey, can you add to this? Or, hey, these are the words that would be really helpful in this case. Is this something you're comfortable saying? And sometimes the answer is no, because that's not what we're doing right now. But it's working together with the mental health provider to provide the best letter, the best support, the best explanation for the school to have understanding of what's going on.
Right. Um, when when is it not a good idea for students to fully cooperate with a university investigation? When like are there instances where you would advise them like don't say anything right now. Just acknowledge receipt of complaint or whatever. Um, are there times where students really need to not cooperate right out of the gate fully because it could make things worse? Either whether it's like a campus conduct issue or a criminal investigation?
My recommendation always, step one, is have an advisor who understands the system because there are times where cooperating is really, really helpful, and there are times where it's not. And there are times where cooperating, but cooperating while nervous and alone, is not going to do you any good because the nerves are not going to help you explain yourself clearly. And so there's a lot of times where what I tell clients is, let's cooperate. We're definitely going to work with them, but I'm going to be there making sure that what you told me when you were relaxed and comfortable is exactly what you actually explain. And so, I can't give kind of universal legal advice of what to do, but the best step is get someone who can advise you where to go. Because so often I see folks who come to me and go, hey, I already did one interview. And in that interview, they didn't do a great job of explaining what happened, or it would have been a lot more beneficial to not go into the facts at that point in time. And had I been there, I may have given them the advice of, this is not the time to talk. Let's sit, let's think, let's reflect, let's figure out some more details before we go in. And so it's really important, in my opinion, to get someone who can advise you in an informed way of what the best next step is, not jump into it and then go, ooh, I don't know if I said the right thing. I should get somebody to check that out.
So let's make this actionable. What do students get first? Like what's the first thing that triggers all of this? Is it an email or is there always a letter that comes from the university that goes to the campus mailbox or to the parents? Like how do students find out that they've been let's assume that this is a campus conduct issue.
Mhm.
How do they first find out?
Usually it's going to be a email. Sometimes it's an email with a formal letter. Sometimes it's a little bit of a less formal email from the Dean of Students office. Every school is a little bit different, but usually it's an email. And usually in that email, there's somebody going, and an investigator would like to talk to you in the next 5 days. There's kind of this, oh, you should act in the next 5 days. Usually you don't have to act in the next 5 days. They're just encouraging you to do so. But a lot of the times there's an email that comes to the student's email that basically says, hey, there are some allegations and an investigator would like to speak with you soon. And a lot of the times I see students go, okay, I'll go talk to somebody and figure out what's going on. Um, but that's usually the first step is that there's some kind of email and a request to speak with an investigator, and then an investigation goes forward from there.
So it sounds like because parents are not receiving that
No.
because, well, parents aren't allowed to know anything about their kids at school. Little snarky response from me. Um, so would you advise that students immediately give that information to their parents so that the parents can then find an advisor like you?
My advice is that parents have a conversation with their students before August.
So
That is, hey,
preemptively.
if you get an email from the school saying you're in trouble, saying something's going on, I'm here for you. Come to me first. Wait to respond. The email's not going to explode in the next 10 minutes. If you get something like that, I'm here for you. And then the parents and the students can work together to find somebody who supports their needs. Sometimes I've done this where I've gone in and it's just a single hour where I'm like, hey, let's just talk it through. Ah, you got this. It's not a big deal. A lot of the time, it's not that. It's okay, we need to have a very intentional response to this. And when we have that intentional response, we have really, really good outcomes. But so, what I would recommend parents do is have that conversation early. Say, hey, if you get in trouble, it's okay. If you get big, scary emails from the school, even things, your grades are dropping, you didn't register for class on time, you have a conduct issue, you have something going on, your housing contract's being revoked. That's okay. Come to me and we're going to figure it out. And making a place where students can feel comfortable coming to their parents immediately can make the outcome so much more positive, not only for the student's mental health, but for the overall outcome of that situation.
What do you think is the number one thing that parents should know before allowing their student to give a statement? Like let's say that like a parent is that let's say that their son or daughter forwards the email and they're like, I don't know what this is. This is stupid. I don't know. Like whatever. I don't know. Is that how kids talk nowadays? And
More or less.
so the parent opens up the email or the text message because kids don't email these days, and parents are like, okay, here's what you should do. Like like what should parents be saying? Like what should be parents be telling their student in terms of like here's what you're allowed to say here like I mean and it sounds like they need to be a little directive. Um
The lawyer answer, you're going to hate me for this, is it depends. It so depends on the facts. But the most beneficial thing that I've seen a lot of parents do is I don't want to see it, but sit down and think through what you remember while it's fresh. Knowing more details for me is always helpful. Don't share it with your parents, don't share it with anybody. But hey, I'm going to figure out what next steps are. You just write down everything you remember. If you've got any other details, just get an idea of what's going on so that you can share it with somebody. And honestly, it's I know I'm redundant, but it's find an advisor who you can tell you is going to be the next steps. Because sometimes it's go straight in and tell them everything. Sometimes it's say nothing, and sometimes it's a big middle ground.
right, right. Yeah, I think it's not only kids that are clueless in what to do. I know from my own work that parents are clueless
Mhm.
with big messy things. Um, what do you think are some of the biggest misperceptions or misconceptions of kind of the legal system and this college space?
I think a lot of the time it's that if you don't think you did anything wrong, you can talk to everybody and it's going to be okay. I think
Mm,
that there are times where, hey, the laws are different at home state than where you are, or hey, this thing, all your friends are doing it and nobody else got in trouble, but hey, it actually technically violates the law, or that it's a lot easier to get caught in college. High school students, the penalty is pretty small. It's easy to not get caught when you're just hanging out with some parents sometimes. There's a lot of ways to get caught and get in trouble in college. And I think a lot of students have this misconception that college is this free for all party like you see in the movies, when the reality is there's an RA on every floor, there's campus police around, your professors are paying attention to what's going on, and that there can be really, really real consequences to getting caught. And the consequences are a lot bigger than you think. That we see the movies where it's party wild, free for all, we can do these silly things. And the reality is there can be big, big consequences to those silly things if you do them in real life.
So the biggest like misconception is that you're not as insulated as you think you are. It's
Exactly.
it's not summer camp. There are very real consequences.
Yeah.
I think we were talking before. I think you had mentioned someone you had worked with. Um, Correct me if I'm wrong. Left flowers for someone one time.
I have seen a number of cases where students have gotten in trouble for leaving items after a breakup. One of the things that in my notes thinking about this is, what can parents talk to their kids about?
Mm-hmm.
Rejection. Be prepared for rejection. Be prepared to break up and break up well. Technically, under the policies, if someone says, I never want to see you again, and you take an action to see them again, in most places that's considered stalking. And that can have big consequences. And so I've seen multiple cases where we had a breakup, really, really loved each other. I did dump thing, or you dumped me, and I left flowers or a teddy bear or a note or anything at your door when you had sent a text saying, I never want to see you again. And now we're in trouble for that. And so that
Does that include social like texting as well, or like Snapchat?
it can. The question is, does it induce, a lot of the time, the question is going to be, does it induce fear? And so if it's 100 text messages, that can make somebody feel really uncomfortable. So I've also seen that where it's, I never want to speak to you again. And then you sent a slew of text messages and, or Snapchats and, or Instagram messages or whatever digital format, digital contact. And then we're dealing with a stalking allegation.
What do you think universities can be doing differently?
I really wish universities took more time to explain the conduct policies to the students. They say, here's your student code of conduct, review it, sign it, bye. But I think that there's a lot that can be done to be having realistic conversations about what the policy is and what these things can look like. You know, for example, a student sees stalking. Okay, I won't engage in stalking, but they don't understand that, hey, it can mean leaving flowers at your ex-girlfriend's house or ex-boyfriend's house. It can be that simple. And so I wish that universities had more conversation, more training for the students of, hey, these are what our policies are. This is what it means. And these are the consequences, that it can be just a warning. It can be academic probation. It also can be suspension. It can be expulsion. It can be loss of scholarship. And so I really wish students coming in knew better really what the policies meant.
And I know that students really like reading the fine print. That's something that they do really well.
Exactly. Everybody is so excited to make new friends,
Right.
get into their university housing, be free from their parents for the first time, and read a 40-page code of conduct.
Right. Well, actually, I, I will put aside my snarky response. Um, from a practical standpoint, from a developmental standpoint, how could that be rebuilt? I mean, how could we take something super important that could have lifelong implications, and it is a terribly dry document and not very interesting. I mean, it's August. it's 80 degrees out, it's sunny, I mean, there's no work to do. Why would I read this garbage? How can universities change that so that we communicate that information, students like really they get it or they have access to it easily. Um, yeah, like how can that look different or be communicated differently, do you think?
Coming from peers. I
Mm,
have done a number of conversations about students, talking to students about consent and what that means. And I've seen two big groups where the older students are really informed. And yeah, no, this is something we've been talking about, we've been having these conversations about, and they invite the conversation of, yeah, let's get everybody educated. Or situations where folks really have no idea. And so I could see, and perhaps this is because I worked for housing when I was in college, but seeing where we have more programs with housing, where we have older students, RAs, having these conversations about conduct and policies and what this means in a fun, ongoing way. And you can really see when those conversations are being had openly. Hey, let's talk about our alcohol use. Let's talk about our drug use. Let's talk about relationships and respect and what that means to work together. When you have that culture really kicking off, that's
hmm.
student led, it's really, really positive. And I think that a lot of the times when it's just like, here's the policy, go, we're not connecting in that way where it's becoming part of the student culture.
Right. I'm thinking about like the some of the guys I've worked with at frats and how that how do you talk about that in a way where people aren't rolling their eyes and like everyone's just on their phone, kind of scrolling through stuff? Their DraftKings account, of course. Oh, I want to ask about that too. But before that, um, yeah, I'm so curious about how to communicate information that is not interesting, doesn't seem relevant because I'm not a rapey dude. Like I don't need to know this. Like like yeah, and yet it's so important because it's so easy to mess up. It's
Mhm.
so easy to mess up. Um, which leads me to actually a question. You had shared with me an idea around like a question around like kind of sexual misconduct and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
specifically, I've had a few clients that have also engaged in this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this even messier corner of sexual violation or maybe the gray area, not just intercourse, but maybe more extreme versions of that.
Mhm.
And maybe you could talk about like choking and I guess we could call it violent acts that seem to be appropriate, maybe, or want desired in the moment. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that I could imagine some kids saying, like, to their parents, like, yeah, I had sex with that person. And it
Mhm.
was, like, I thought it was consensual. Um, I cannot imagine a kid saying, oh yeah, I choked her and then like she wanted me to smack her around and then like, oh, I wrapped this around her neck and like I don't think kids feel comfortable talking about that, but that's really messy, isn't it?
It is, and it's happening a lot. I think that we
Mm,
have the internet, and the internet has a lot of things, and there's a lot of conversations being had in the younger circles around choking, around kink, around BDSM. And a lot of students are coming across my desk where we've engaged in choking, aggressive behavior during a one night stand, during a first interaction, not in an aggressive way, not in a violent way, but a, hey, I saw this on the internet that I think people like this.
right.
And a lot of it coming from naivety, but in a way that's really upsetting to the other person who didn't expect it. And so I think for that, it's a lot of conversations around consent, around respect, and around what that can look like. You know,
Hmm.
I've got a young kid and there's a Sesame Street line of plan the play, play the plan. And that's what I talk to my clients about of, hey, it's okay if everybody's interested in going to that place, but that
Right.
needs to be conversations. And I think while it's tough for parents to say, hey, if you're going to be engaging in this kind of behavior, here's how some ways to go about it. But it's starting to have those conversations of, hey, make sure you're having informed consent. Make sure that everybody's on the same page in whatever you're doing. You don't have to go into the details of a kid's sex life, but hey, if you're making out, if you're getting to first base, make sure everybody's on the same page. And I think if you're starting that, that's the expectation that as we're going through, I think somebody might like this. We're making more sure that we're all on the same page.
So I'm going to ask a very leading question because
Dig it.
I've heard this from actually a, a lot of young women, which has been very surprising to me. I hear more details from women, by the way, in terms of like sexuality than men.
Mhm.
Um, which is, I don't know, I think kind of unusual because I'm a dude therapist and um maybe I'm just that good that they're that comfortable talking about it.
It's
But
you.
it's probably me. But um well, if they don't say no, there's consent.
No. I hear this
Can
all
you
the
talk about
time.
that?
I hear this from parents a lot of,
Mm,
oh, there wasn't something that she didn't
right,
sock him in the face.
right.
Therefore, there was consent. I think so. Consent can shift state to state. Each state has a definition of what legal consent is, and university policies are pretty open to defining consent.
Can you explain that a little bit? Like give some examples because I mean you are an advisor in many states. Can you maybe give yeah, examples of that?
So, looking at state law, New York and California have much more strong consent laws than the rest of the states.
So explicit.
Yes. And so there has to be affirmative consent that's very filled in. Everyone is clearly, it doesn't have to go to, hey, I'm going to put this here now,
Right.
but that everyone is very, very, very much on the same page. Other states are a little fuzzier. Generally, across the board, the kind of safest way of approaching it is looking for affirmative consent. Is there every single step of the way a clear understanding that there's a meeting of the minds, that we are both very much on the same page? The example I give is if we're looking at taking off somebody's shirt and somebody
Mm.
puts their hands on the bottom of the shirt and the other person raises their hands up. Okay, we are all on the same page that the shirt is going to be removed.
So
We
so
are,
that's it. That's an I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah, go.
That's an example of non-verbal consent.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
That we are all on the same page. There is a meeting of the minds. We are all, because it would be really weird if someone touched the bottom of someone else's shirt, they put their hands up, and then the next action was like, we're going to make out.
Right.
Okay, we know where we're going when this happens. And so consent doesn't have to be verbal. If it's going to be verbal, cool, great. But it can be usually across the board nonverbal as long as there's this meeting of the mind. There are times where consent is never going to be consent. If you're incapacitated, there are age restrictions. But if you are in a realm where you are able to give consent, usually it's making sure that there's this meeting of the minds. And a lot of the time we hear, oh, there wasn't a lack of consent. There wasn't, uh, you know, she didn't fight back. He didn't fight back. There wasn't someone who screamed in response. That's not enough. There needs to be an understanding every step of the way. What I recommend to my clients is make sure we're on board before what's going on. Hey, tonight I was thinking we could move to this space or do this action or engage in this. It doesn't have to be so formulaic, but it can be a casual conversation of, hey, I thought tonight we could blank. Yeah, does that sound good? And by the way, if anything doesn't feel good for you, just let me know. And making sure that we have that understanding beforehand. And then we're checking for those nonverbal cues throughout the whole process and can be checking for verbal cues too. But it's understanding what your state laws are, what your school policies are, and then just treating other people with respect.
Two follow-up questions. Can and I know that your response probably should be it depends. I get that, but I'm gonna try to like navigate around that. Can anyone really give consent under the influence of drug and alcohol? Um, because that's a it's a not a binary state. It's a spectrum. It's a blood alcohol level. I mean, there's so many variables involved, and
Mhm.
I can imagine that my blood alcohol level at 10 p.m. might be different than my blood alcohol at 11 p.m. How does drug and alcohol? I mean, there's the obvious, like, well, if
Mhm.
someone's passed out, they can't give consent.
Yeah.
That's obvious. That's the extreme. But then there's this gray area that we seem to be spending a lot of time in, where, okay, so someone's been using
Mhm.
whatever, they've been drinking, they've been doing shots of Tito's or whatever because it's someone's birthday. Can they give consent?
Someone under the influence cannot consent, no matter how much verbally they're saying they want it. And this is a question that's come up in some of my trainings is, okay, so you're telling me if somebody is saying that this is exactly what they want, it's not? And the answer is no. And it's a hard line of what to drunk to under the influence to consent is. There is no firm line there. And, there are factors that are considered. It can be looking at, is speech slurred? Is mobility impaired? Is consciousness there? But across the board, what I recommend is if there's any question in your mind, buy breakfast and say no.
Right.
And that's a conversation I've had, which is just if there's a question, err on the side of no, because there are some people who it's really, really hard to tell what state they're in. We've all got the friend who goes from totally fine to really messy in a couple seconds.
Hmm.
And then we don't know it, but in that little middle period, they probably couldn't consent to something if it came across as an opportunity for them at that point. And so to me, the recommendation is always, always err on the side of it can wait. Nobody's going anywhere.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a ridiculous question, but it makes sense in my brain, which maybe is not a good way to frame it. But let's take that same person, that same window of time, same alcohol consumption, but they're not about to engage in sexual intercourse. They're about to go buy a car. Are they able to do that? Is
It
that
depends.
okay? It depends. I because I have clients who will leave and they will tell me about like, oh, I got a tattoo and I did this and I signed up for this. And I've had one student who signed up for a credit card. And at first I was like, just like, palm to head. But then I thought like, oh, this is kind of interesting because I wonder legally, are they able to do that? Like, are they able to sign a contract? Like what are your thoughts about it? And I know it's a ridiculous question, but like, but it makes me think of like a good argument for, well, if you can't go and buy a car from, 9 until 11 because of your blood alcohol level, you can't consent to sexual intercourse.
Yeah.
Or is that not true?
The contract, it gets very tricky and complicated,
Mm,
and I'll defer to a contract attorney for that.
spoken like a true attorney.
That's what we learn in law school is the answer is always it depends.
Right.
Or ask someone else of a different specialty. No, it's complicated, but I think I like to tell my clients of like if you have in terms of just going back to sex and consent or any kind of hooking up, it doesn't have to be sexual intercourse.
Right.
It can be making out and consent. And that if there is ever a question, get exchange numbers, text them to buy them breakfast the next day. If they're feeling that bad where you're not sure, they're going to be very appreciative for breakfast the next day.
Right.
And that's going to go a lot better for everybody. And it's just better to err on the side of caution and respect.
All right. My follow-up question is this is more normal. And my guess is that you have definitely had this happen. I've I mean with our clients. Um the the next day or the
Mhm.
next week, sometimes a month later, um regret and a retroactive repeal of consent. Is that even a thing? Can I consent here, but then change my mind as to whether I was able to consent later on, which I know again is messy. But I've had clients who have been in this situation where they have literally told me in my office, I was okay with it then, but after I thought about it a week later, I wasn't okay with it. What is that? Like, how do you frame that?
I see a lot of cases coming across my desk of that situation. Either, hey, we had a situation where we hooked up one night and I'm really upset. I would have been fine with it if they would have called me back,
Right.
but now I wouldn't have done that if I didn't know you weren't going to call me. Or, hey, we dated for 6 months, and in that period of dating, I was totally fine with what happened. And now we've broken up, and the way the breakup went really, really hurt. And now that I think about it, there was something that I didn't like 5 months ago. We see that a lot.
That's a
And
good example. That's a good example.
it gets really it gets really complicated because it's really hard to say what truly was in someone's mind. Was there that meeting of the minds, that consent in that moment? What information was going on? And so you can have a situation where there's a big question of if somebody says, "Hey, I would like to do X tonight," and the other person says, "Yes, I would like that." The event occurs. "Hey, are you comfortable with this?" "Yes, I am." Great. Event occurs. And then after the fact, "I don't know if I liked that." And that can then be investigated. And there's a big question that very much can toe the line of, was there coercion? Was there true consent? Are the facts getting a little shifted in folks' memories after the fact? And now we're having a situation that doesn't sound like consent when it was, or a situation where there wasn't consent and it was seemed to be fine at the time. And it can get really, really complicated when we have these issues right on the cusp of what everybody wanted to do and it wasn't clearly communicated, or there's a changing of minds. And we're seeing a lot more frequently than we did 10 years ago. Hey, something happened, I changed my mind. I'm going to file a complaint versus, hey, something happened and I changed my mind and I'm going to talk badly about them to my friends. And so we're seeing the consequences of this shift in understanding, or this, hey, I didn't like that, being, hey, now you're looking at expulsion.
Right.
Hey, now you may not be able to go to med school. Hey, law school is off the table.
I have seen it so many times. I think from just about every angle, from the person that has kind of um, retroactively removed consent or changed their mind about
Mm-hmm.
like whether they did consent or not, and then the other party where someone said like, "You raped me,"
Mm-hmm.
and my client said like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
Like what? Uh, no. Which seems like such a horrible thing to say, but hearing and knowing a client for so long and knowing that like, oh, this does not track with like what I know of this client.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that seems like,
False
oh, go ahead, please go.
false accusations happen. It it's a unfortunate reality, but there are certainly instances of false accusations, and there are instances where things just get really confused. We also run into Okay, both parties were well under the influence of alcohol. Then what? Often we're seeing counter complaints. It's not that nobody's at fault, it's that
Right.
everybody's now in trouble. Or a situation that, what if everybody blacks out? What if no one actually knows what happened? And it can get really tough to figure out where to go from there and what happened and what should be done.
Right. Yeah, yeah. How often are there some of those counter complaints made? Is that pretty common or not as, yeah, not as common?
It definitely doesn't happen with every case, but there's a pretty solid number of cases where there are counter complaints. If alcohol's involved and both parties were too drunk to consent, there's a pretty frequent counter complaint. If we're dealing with
Hmm.
situations where in the span of a relationship, often we'll see, okay, hey, while we're talking about this relationship, especially if it's a more volatile relationship, there's going to be something that everyone did wrong
Right.
or that anyone can think of, hey, this one thing wasn't great. And so then you're looking at a situation where not a small percentage of cases end up with a counter complaint.
What do you think, and I'm really going to challenge you here. What do you think has been the most significant or most interesting from maybe a legal perspective case that you've worked on? Like where there are so many moving parts there. Like we talked about before, I had a client that was studying abroad and um and it was a formal study abroad program through the university that they were at and was accused of rape. And the authorities in that country were brought in, as well as US authorities and the school officials. Um, and I was brought in much later by the attorney. Uh, What, I mean, do you have any cases that are like super complex like that that really kind of stick out in your mind that are okay to talk about?
I think there are a lot of cases like that that get really complicated. With Title IX, we have the interesting question of where the jurisdiction is. With Title IX, the jurisdiction is on campus right now. It's been different in the past. The current regulation is things that occurred on campus. So the same event that occurs in a residence hall and a apartment where everyone from this university is all undergrads, the same action can be handled really differently. So I've seen some really complicated matters when it comes just to what happened here versus what happened here. I think we're also dealing with some of the kind of most atypical cases I see are families where sex and sexual interest hasn't been communicated. And there are situations where we've heard of cases dealing with using AI to make pornographic images. And
Mm,
what does that look like
oh,
when it comes to if these would be images of other students? What if we're doing and using AI in inappropriate sexual ways and it touches campus? And that's something that's been an interesting question. And in terms of most complicated, I think we just often end up with volatile relationships that students are for the first time getting in a relationship. They may not have always had a lot of coaching on how we treat others who are in a relationship, or, hey, this is unacceptable and we probably should have broken up 6 months ago, but we didn't. And that's when the cases get the most complex legally because we have so many events that are occurring and so many moving parts and so many people that have gotten pulled in as, oh, yeah, I remember that argument here and this argument here. And it's the relationship finally ends and someone goes to the university and goes, hey, this person's not great. And here's all the things they did wrong. And then we're looking at this huge multi-allegation situation where any one allegation being found a violation could result in suspension.
do any of these cases, because so many students are out of state students,
Mhm.
i- is it a factor when they go home and they leave the state? Are there ever situations where they're not allowed to leave the state because of like pending charges, or I mean, or does that not really factor in? Like, so if someone's from New York and they're going to Emory, down south, they can go back home, and but everything just keeps moving, in terms of like the process.
Theoretically, there could be situations where there could be criminal charges with a bond where they're not supposed to leave the county. I think practically, I've never seen that.
Okay.
Realistically, I don't think there's any judge that's going to put a condition as a bond if you can't leave. Theoretically, could have happened, yes. Where I see that get complicated is with potential withdrawals and the implication of withdrawing during the process, transferring back home, and what that means. So, if you're charged with a conduct violation, often it's required with Title IX, it's often done with broad conduct. The investigation will continue with or without you. So, if you withdraw and say, you know what, I'm out, I didn't like you guys anyways, I'm going back home, the investigation for Title IX must still continue, and for conduct will usually still continue. And so there can be consequences. So, for example, in the state of Virginia, there's a law that says basically if you withdraw while under investigation for sexual misconduct, that it's going to be a huge thing on your transcript that says withdrew during investigation and until the investigation's over and there's no violation or period of time. And so there can be implications to withdrawing. Um, Sometimes there are ways that students can go, hey, I'm going to go through informal resolution and I'm just going to agree to leave the college, the university. And the other party says, you know what? If I never have to see your face again, great. And an advisor can help make that happen. But it can get really complicated when student wants to withdraw and go home, and just overall having the supports. Sometimes students get kicked off of on campus housing. It's for misconduct issues, or it can be for alcohol or stealing your roommate's socks. If you're a local student, an in state student, that can be easy. Okay, cool. I'm going to stay with my Aunt Sarah until I get this sorted out. Or, oh, my parents live an hour away from campus. I'll just commute for the next week while I find an apartment. But if you're an out of state student and you get kicked out of housing, you need to have the means to get a hotel or a place to stay or something to land until you can get it figured out. And that gets a lot harder for out of state students when housing gets disrupted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have definitely seen that happen where they're still students, but they can't live on campus.
Hmm.
And there are so many universities and colleges that have very few options. Um,
Hmm. Especially mid-semester.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I want to ask a very granular question that has nothing to do with this, if that's okay. If police, let's
Hmm.
think about this from a criminal, perspective. So police show up to my house, okay,
Hmm.
and they're at my front door. I don't have to let them in unless they have a warrant or probable cause or something like that. Is that correct?
Usually.
Okay. I mean, except for the dead body that's behind me
Ex-
and like like
Usually you do not have they can only enter the home if there's a warrant or there's, someone screaming or something going on behind you.
right. Okay. How does that change if it's university housing, whether it's a dorm room, because there are very specific lines, I
Yeah.
think, if
Yeah.
I understand correctly, thresholds that cannot be crossed. And I can't imagine that any student knows about this. And I wonder, like, if you could talk a little bit about where those thresholds are, um, on campus, but then maybe fraternities. Like,
Mhm.
are fraternities part of student housing technically, or is that off-campus housing? Yeah, can you talk about that line and whether police can cross or not? Even if let's say that like there's no party in the background, or
Mhm.
there is a party. Okay, we'll give that scenario or those scenarios.
Yeah, so when you're looking at university housing, again, it depends, but a bulk of the time there is a contract. The housing contract usually says you are waiving all of the rights and the university can come in at any point in time. Your RA can come in and walk through your room, housing can come in and walk through your room, university police can come in and walk through your room. You're waiving those
Even
rights.
without notice, because normally don't they have like a like well for maintenance or something, or like an RA, like they'll have
hmm
like we will give you a certain time of
hmm
or a certain amount of notice, but they don't have to include that. I
It, yeah, it will depend on the contract. There are some times where they have that, and sometimes there's notice unless we have a reason that we want to come in. And so it again goes back to college students reading contracts really closely, but that housing contract, usually you're waiving a lot of those kind of search and seizure protection rights.
okay.
Um, Fraternity houses can be really different. It depends. Sometimes you see universities where technically they own it and they lease it to the fraternity and they have more qualifications of this is university campus and we have these certain rights and we can revoke it and we can come in with notice or if we, if there's a reason. Or sometimes we have Greek life housing that's fully off campus. And then that's going to be just like any other home where you're going to have that very firm search and seizure protection. And so it really depends on what our housing contract looks like and whether the university's involved.
I I ask because I've also had clients that were throwing parties and police showed up and walked in and and it made me think, I mean, and this has not happened once, this has happened over and over and over again, and it made me think like, well, are they allowed to do that, and is a party probable cause, or like do they suspect that there are underage people there, or like how do they do that? Because that seems, especially I'm thinking about like IU specifically,
Mhm,
where I think some of the frat houses are off campus
mhm.
technically. Um, and then what if the party is outside and police walk around back? Because I know that there are very specific like like spaces where like they can go but they can't go unless you invite them in. Um, and the clients I've worked with have always
Police are a little bit like vampires.
that is a that is a fantastic way to put it. Can you explain what you mean by that?
There are a lot of places where police can't go unless you invite them in. Your private residence with 1,000 asterisks. Often they cannot enter unless you invite them in. There was a situation where I once had a party in law school. Everyone was in their mid late 20s and everyone was very much above board, but we had been a little loud and the police came, but I made sure to step outside, shut the door behind me so there was no visual inside. Conveniently, there was also a couple drunk law students out front that mentioned that this is Emory Law's student body president and this is our graduation party. To which the officers, I said, everyone here is above age. I'm aware of the decibel requirements. I'm fairly certain we are well within the decibel requirements for this party. I do not consent to you entering the party. And our very lovely police officer said, nope, nope, and just
That
chose not to
poor
engage with the
that
Emory
poor
Law.
woman or poor man. They walked away saying, "These students are so insufferable. I need to work at a community college."
They were very the APD, Atlanta Police Department, are lovely folks generally. And I was very thankful for my classmate who decided to give me the introduction of this is our student body president. It made it a very quick intro and exit. But it's a situation where you're making sure there are sometimes protections and sometimes ways that they can get in. For me, my answer was I'm making sure the door is closed behind me. We're stepping back, we're stepping
Right.
away. I'm providing a little bit of information because I know how much information I want to provide, not more, not less. And so
Yeah.
it's tricky and every state law is different and every city and municipality may have different protections. There are definitely opportunities where folks are living in a large housing situation and they want to make sure that they know their rights. There's a lot of local attorneys who you can pay for an hour of their time to run those questions by. And for me, if I was a student living in a situation where, hey, I want to know what protections I have, call an attorney, offer to pay them hourly, ask all the questions for your local area because it's so dependent upon local
I
municipality.
I really like that suggestion. I can imagine frats and sororities and even this actually student government. I can imagine them doing that and actually getting a lot of value out of that.
Yeah.
And I can also imagine that attorney that shows up also talks about, hey, by the way, get consent. Um,
There's a lot of lawyers that would love to come and talk to groups like this. I've very much enjoyed going into fraternity houses and speaking with just student groups about consent and policies and what it means. I know there's a lot of other folks who would love to do that as well,
right,
and that would be happy to come and answer those what ifs. And then, hey, if something does happen, here's my card.
right, yeah.
But so
And
there's
by the way, I also
there are a lot of folks who will come in and for an hourly fee answer all those what if hypothetical questions for your specific area, and they're going to be well versed. But just find
that's
somebody
really
local.
that seems like such a good value of an hour, and
Hmm.
that cost. Yeah, I think it's a really good suggestion. Along with suggestions, this is a great segue. Do you have any resources, books, podcasts, YouTube channels that you think could be really valuable either for students, or parents, or even like therapists, like clinicians like me who work with college students? Like, I mean, are there resources that you would recommend to people?
There's a lot of resources out there, and a lot of resources that fit different needs. There are resources talking about consent for younger folks, for more religious folks, for
Mm,
really kind of open, honest conversations. Personally, I am actually going to be releasing pretty soon a quick little 60, 90-minute tutorial talking about consent relationships in colleges. That's going to be available on my website. But I think for me, my encouragement is not necessarily anything specific, but find something that talks about affirmative consent at a level folks are comfortable with, and then have those conversations.
right. Okay. Um, and if that is ready by the time this posts, it would be great to have a link to that little that handout that you're putting together, or that resource that you're putting
Yeah.
together. We'll definitely want to put that in the show notes. Totally switching gears. I won't take up too much more of your time. Let's move away from legal stuff. This is such a strange time in terms of career and the economy. We're in a recession, maybe, but we're totally not. Everything's fine. Do you have any career advice for students that are thinking about the law? Because AI might eat like all need for lawyers, apparently. Um, I don't know, like, yeah, so like what do you tell people who ask about like career advice? And I mean, like what are you seeing in terms of like places in the world where like, oh, this is a really good direction to head in, or oh, I wouldn't do this, or yeah.
My advice for law students has always been the same, which is first and foremost, read for fun, just read books. It doesn't have to be SCOTUS blog where you're reading legal decisions every day. Read fiction, read books. So much of law is thinking about structuring arguments, about reading hundreds of pages comfortably. And the more you can just get comfortable reading and thinking and structuring paragraphs, the better. The other thing is most schools don't have a pre-law major. And that's because a lot of law school isn't actually learning the laws. It's learning legal philosophy. And then when you study for the bar, you figure out your state laws. But what I really encourage students who want to go to law school to do an undergrad is to find what they love. Find what makes your heart spark joy. It could be government, it could be chemistry, it could be engineering, it could be art, but find what interests you and sparks joy for you. For me, I loved helping people. I love making the world better. I want to see tangible, positive change in this world. I did not do pre law stuff necessarily. I wasn't part of the pre law clubs.
Mm,
I really wanted to see positive change. And that was what I was able to talk about in my law school essay is this is how I've always been working to want to help people. And this is why I want to go to law school is I want to continue providing help and support in a different way. And my friends who were most successful in getting into law were ones who had already had an interest. I have a good friend recently who studied engineering, spent years of his career doing engineering, chemical engineering for a brewery, but then went to law school to do patent law and has been incredibly successful getting a job because he'd already found something he loved and is able to do law in that career. And the other thing I see that is the biggest advice for students being successful getting into the legal field is be okay with starting at the bottom. The type of students who want to go to law school, a lot of the time, they are the leaders. They want to do it, they want to do the thing. But the reality is, you have to start at the bottom. And the interns who I've seen come across as most successful are the ones who are okay with doing the grunt work at the beginning. When I was in high school, I volunteered at the DA's office. They weren't giving me cases of, oh, here, go try this jury trial. Instead, I worked for the bad check department and sat for 8 hours a day making black and white photocopies of checks. But from that, I got letters of reference. I had that experience. And so we see a lot of or students who want to go into law getting frustrated that they're not able to intern at a law office and be a baby lawyer from the beginning. But the reality is the students who do really, really well are okay starting from the bottom, are okay. Yeah, I'll do filing. But in the process of filing, you're going to talk to me about how you built this case. I'm going to be cool with making copies because while we're making copies, you're going to teach me why this is important. And so those students end up gaining a lot more information than the ones who get frustrated and shut down because they're not able to start at the middle of their legal career.
right. Yeah, there seems to be kind of a subtle but pervasive entitlement. Like I have a degree now. Shouldn't I be CEO? Like I should be a named partner, right? It's like no,
No.
no, that's like 10, 15, 20 years from now. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's so
No,
much
that was
yeah, there's so much value in that early stage process.
that
There's
was
just
my first real job was working as a legal assistant. I took a year off between law school and undergrad, and I filed. The thing I learned the best during that internship or that position was the alphabet because I filed. That was what I did. I answered phones and I did filing, but I read every single motion that I filed. And then when the attorneys had free time, I came to them and said, "Hey, I read the motion for the Smith case. I have a couple questions about that." And then they would answer my questions. When I got to law school and was starting to write practice pretend motions, I was one of the most prepared, not because I'd written motions for these attorneys, but because I'd read 100 of them while filing them for close to minimum wage. And it's that willingness to start at the bottom that really helped. And it was the letter of recommendation from those attorneys that got me into the top law school that I went to with the scholarship funds that I got. I talked to admissions and they're like, yeah, we knew those attorneys. And if you could work with them, we knew you'd succeed. And it was because I sat and was happy to sit and file and start from the bottom. And not a lot of folks these days are okay doing that, but the ones who are end up reaching the top a lot faster.
I think that's great advice. It's just yeah, that really tracks with just grittiness.
Yeah.
Grittiness has so much value in those early stages. Megan, this has been so interesting and really enjoyable to talk about because I've had so many clients that have had so many legal issues, and I feel privileged to work with some attorneys and some judges. but hearing your insights kind of behind the scenes, I think is super helpful. And I can imagine could be really helpful for so many of the families I work with and other families out there. So, with that in mind, if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
I've got a website. It's ballardmitchell.com. Come visit, and my contact information's there, and I'm happy to talk with folks and support families
Great.
across the US.
And do you work in every state or only some states? What is there a limit to where you can work, or is it really across the board?
Right now, I am able to act as an advisor nationwide. I've got kind of a focus within our Southeast area, just that's where I'm the most familiar, but I am able to work as an advisor nationwide.
Okay, that's great. Megan Mitchell, everyone. Megan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. It was great to talk. And I did want to add one thing. I realized